Hello and welcome to the Khairion podcast, your guide to everything concerning the politics and business of the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. Welcome, dear listeners. My name is Katarina Shomodyova. I am the CEO of Khairion, and my esteemed guest today is Dr. Miklós Sárközy. Among other things, an expert on tourism in various countries in the Middle East and North Africa. Welcome, Dr. Sárközy.
Hello. Good morning for everybody. It's a great honor for me to be invited to this noble program.
Our topic today is tourism in Afghanistan. Probably quite an unusual issue, but since Dr. Sárközy has recently returned from a trip to Afghanistan, we are very eager to hear about all his experiences. So, why should one travel to Afghanistan? What are the main points of interest and what is there to experience?
Actually, Afghanistan has a vast potential of tourism sites. Of course, this country has been largely overshadowed by war, by conflicts, by terrorism, military clashes between Soviets and Mujahideen and the Taliban and the US forces and the NATO. Everybody knows this troubled 40 years of Afghanistan, but you should know that Afghanistan before this conflict, was the most favorite place for example, hippies. The so-called hippie trail went through Afghanistan in the 1960s and 1970s. It was a favorite destination. Parts of Kabul was as a big hub for hippies, for Westerners, I would say. And also, we clearly remember that in the 1970s, there were already buses connecting Kabul with Tehran. So I clearly remembered one of my former professors recalled those golden days when he was traveling between Kabul and Tehran by bus. So, and Afghanistan is somehow, as a modern state, has a vast potential of ancient sites. So everybody speaks about terrorism and security issues, but this is the land of Zarathustra. This is the land of Rumi. This is the land of many ancient sites such as Herat, Bamiyan, Balkh, Mazar-e-Sharif, Kabul, Panjshir, and many other interesting places in the Hindu Kush valleys, where once Buddhism was flourishing. Here, Afghanistan used to be the stronghold of Buddhism between the 3rd century BC until the 9th, 10th century AD. Vast Buddhist sites, stupas, monasteries, and of course the hollow walls of the now destroyed great Buddhas in Bamiyan clearly testify the Buddhist legacy of Afghanistan. And even before Buddhism, it was the place of Zoroastrianism, many ancient sites, and Afghanistan was part of the Silk Road, so connecting between India and Central Asia and Iran and China. So here you can discover many interesting influences. And of course, it was a major center of Islamic sciences, great cities that just like the Timurid, Herat, or the ancient Balkh clearly testify the richness and the great legacy and heritage of Islamic heritage and learning of Afghanistan. This was the place where Rumi grew up. The greatest Sufi poet once fled from Afghanistan to Anatolia when the Mongols invaded this country. So these are just also before Alexander the Great. You know the name of Alexander. Everybody knows the name of Alexander the Great. He himself marched through Afghanistan twice, and he settled many Greek mercenaries, especially in Bactria, in northern Afghanistan. And later, the so-called Greco-Bactrian kingdom was founded here, where Greek script was adopted and Greek language was used for administration and culture. Even after the disappearance, after the end of the Greco-Bactrian kingdom in the 1st century BC, the Greek script persevered and was used by locals, and it was adopted to a local Iranian language, and it was used until as late as the 9th, 10th century AD. So this is a very rich country where you can see many interesting influences, and also those interested in geography, in hiking. So these are the peaks of the 6,000 meters high, 7,000 meters high peaks of the Hindu Kush mountains rule the geographical surface of the country. So this is a country where you can see so many interesting sites.
Given the complicated and often violent history of the past several decades, spending a holiday in a country like Afghanistan might sound a little bizarre to the Western ear. Yet the tourist industry in Afghanistan is not entirely non-existent. Please tell us more about its history and present-day state.
You may find it a bit strange, but tourism always existed in Afghanistan, even in the most troubled days, even in the darkest days of the Taliban. We heard about scattered groups and individual travelers who entered the country and somehow try to visit as much as possible in Afghanistan. I can mention a British travel agency, which I think now it's stopped working. But for many years, for example, this agency and its CEO from Newcastle was highly active in Afghanistan. I also heard about Hungarians, individual travelers who regularly traveled in Afghanistan 20 years ago, 15 years ago. So during the civil war, during the NATO-Taliban conflict, still there were small groups. Of course, it was not a major destination. We know the security challenges. We know exactly that it was Afghanistan was never ever showed up in any tourist catalog. However, small groups always enter the country, or parts of the country, especially the cities, seem to be relatively safe even in 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And now the situation surprisingly improved. After the sudden departure of the NATO forces more than 2 years ago, nobody would have thought that within 2 years, organized groups would enter Afghanistan. And now this is the situation because the new Taliban government, which is still struggling to be acknowledged by many countries, which is still, sanctioned and not exactly the favorite of the United Nations, and is heavily criticized for women's rights and other rights. Still, the Taliban government started showing signs of pragmatism. I think they would love to promote themselves as a peaceful country. And even if you go to the airport of Kabul, there's a sign in 3 languages, in English, in Dari, and in Pashtun, claiming that the Afghan government would love to have peaceful relations with all the nations of the world. This is the logo, this is the message you can see for the first time when you enter the country. And indeed, the Taliban government started issuing visas, although the number of Taliban embassies and consulates are hardly limited because, as I told you, the number of countries which officially acknowledge the Taliban government is very limited. Yet these embassies started issuing visas for tourists. And there are actually there, and the conditions inside the country shows signs of cautious improvement. This means, first of all, there in many places there is already safety. So of course, there are strict security regulations, checkpoints, or at the airports, there are quite long process and complicated process of security activities. But besides this, you can travel quite freely in the country because the whole country is ruled by the Taliban, indeed. And of course, they have some income, I think, from tourism. They are quite pragmatic. And this is the way they build their own power. So they are willing to accept that they are not popular officially in the eyes of many countries, but unofficially, the number of countries cooperating with the Taliban is much higher than officially. So, and in this framework, tourism can also work. Of course, there are limitations. Of course, you cannot drink alcohol. You have to accept the local customs and other regulations. But those people who had already traveled to Iran, for example, perhaps had some knowledge about this behavior.
So you see that there is quite significant support for the development of tourism within the current government.
I wouldn't say that there is a big support, but there are functioning hotels, guest houses. There are only a few fixers or local travel agencies. So if you want to travel to Afghanistan, you can find this guy or that company which can organize your trip. So this means that local English-speaking staff can organize your trip. They can reserve hotels. They can organize restaurants. They can provide you with transport, cars, jeeps, and domestic flights also working. So there's a number of companies operating flights between Afghanistan and other countries, or inside Afghanistan is not too high, not too much. But there are two local Afghan companies such as Comair and Ariana, and also the Fly Dubai started operating flights between Kabul and Dubai, for example. But there are flights between Kabul and Peshawar, between Kabul and Tehran. So on a very limited scale, I would say there are services, but these are quite reliable services. My own experience was that I felt safety, I felt security, I felt completely secure, that I didn't experience any threats during my trip. And we had acceptable hotels. These were not top hotels, but there's acceptable places, good breakfast, abundant lunches and dinners. So there is a food abundance in the country. Of course, everybody speaks about poverty. Yes, indeed, poverty exists in Afghanistan, but markets are working, functioning, and there is no food shortage. I mean, at the markets, officially, of course, people are poor, and there are no Western restaurants, no international restaurants. But those who would love to enjoy local Oriental food, they can find their places. And markets offer you a big variety of fruits, veggies, and bread. So I would say that this is the main concern of the Taliban now, that let people feel safe and secure in the country, and especially by means of food. So the Taliban government, we know, made painstaking steps in the past months to provide the country with flour, with bread, because this kind of bread shortage was a major issue after they take over. So I think, and there are rumors or there are news that the Taliban's making businesses with Kazakhstan, which is a major grain producer. And the Kazakhs were happy to discover Afghanistan as a new market. And the bread we were eating in Afghanistan indeed possibly came from Kazakhstan.
That's an interesting development. Based on your personal experiences on your recent trip, do you think that there is a realistic potential for the development of the tourism industry in Afghanistan?
Actually, this can be a major income. That can be a good income for the Taliban government. Whether you like them or not, you should be pragmatist. And the Taliban, if you don't raise political questions, don't bother you, I think. So when you enter the country, you can feel a quite brief form. So there's no overcomplicated process. If you have the visa and you fill the forms at the border, at the airport, you can enter freely the country. And if you have local fixers, of course, you have to have local fixers. And I think the Taliban don't oppose this issue. Actually, if you have there are two types of travelers. Foreign travelers I encountered in Afghanistan. The individual travelers, bloggers, vloggers, even Hungarians who travel by car or who do rent a car, but they travel by their own. This can also already work. Even female travelers. I just, when I started preparing for this tour, I just checked that one of the most famous Hungarian female travelers recently visited Afghanistan, and she posted her own images she had taken in Afghanistan, and apparently she traveled alone. A young Hungarian lady. But others, also Hungarian individual travelers who came by their own Hungarian cars, traveled through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and they got their carnet de passage, their travel permission in Mashhad at the Afghan consulate in eastern Iran. And they freely entered Afghanistan, and they could arrange everything. So this is the first type of tourist. Even I also met an African lady, nationality of who I was quite unclear for me, but this African lady was a photographer, and she was greeted by her local fixers. This is our old friend who traveled even last year, and now she returned, and she now a big lover of Afghanistan. So there are regular travelers, more surprisingly. And also, there are the organized tours. You may find it surprising or shocking, but already there are a few, especially Western travel agencies, offering services or organizing groups to Afghanistan, tours to Afghanistan, visiting the major sites in all over the country. I can mention 2 or 3 agencies at least, which now promote their own Afghan tours, but I don't mention them in this program. But the sites included are Kabul, Herat, Mazar-e-Sharif, also Bamiyan, and but also the most adventurous versions also offer tours to Kandahar. This is the stronghold of the Taliban. And also such remote places like Aybak or Mazar-e-Sharif or an area of Mazar-e-Sharif or the place called Jam, where one of the most famous minarets of Afghanistan was built in the 12th century, in the Ghurid period, are already on the list which can be visited. Of course, there are local permissions. You have to stop to get the permissions of the local authorities, but this works. I myself, and also you can travel you can use domestic flights and also cars. So in older times, for example, there was no security between Kabul and the Bamiyan Valley, and you had to use flights. But now everybody moves there by car because the route is safe. This is also a novelty, and I had the chance to visit local tiny villages around Bamiyan. So I wouldn't have thought 2 years or 3 years ago that I would use a jeep to. I would have a jeep tour around Bamiyan or the Bande Amir Lakes and visiting these small, tiny Hazara villages in remote and quiet, isolated areas. This was an amazing experience. These big gorges, valleys, wadis we saw there, and there was safety. There was the road. The level of quality of the road was an ebb and flow, but actually these travelers who join these tours are experienced ones. Most of them are quite elderly and of course quite wealthy, but the services offered by these agencies are quite good enough for them. And there are local fixers, I would say. And the Taliban, I think, you give a tacit support, and they provided us with visas quite quickly. So if you want to get an Afghan visa, it's not so cheap, but they prepare it within 2 days. This is a very surprising and very easy process.
That's rather surprising. How does a Westerner obtain an Afghan visa, say an EU citizen or a US or Canadian citizen?
Well, actually, there is no limitation. Actually, the Taliban don't say that the US citizens are excluded. I myself traveled with US citizens, and there was no suspicion, no inquiry, no questionnaire. And a very average and very quite sketchy questionnaire was given to us to fill it. So there are 2 ways. Either you have a fixer or a local agent who organizes the visit to the embassy or the consulate, and the visa will be prepared within hours. Or if you don't have a fixer or an agent or local travel agency representative, you have to wait 2 days. Usually the duration to get a visa in some cases can be maximum 2 days. Of course, there are different opinions about the prices of the visa because the number of consulates run by the Taliban is still not so numerous, and the prices can be different. But in the cities like Dubai or Mashhad or Abu Dhabi or Peshawar or in Khorog in Tajikistan, they already are ready to provide you with visas.
That's quite surprising.
Yeah, and also there is the most other surprising issue was there was no limitation in internet in the country. I mean, in the hotels, in the guest houses we stayed, there was free internet. Of course, sometimes there was a lack of electricity. This is a sign of I would say, less developing situation, especially in the countryside. In Bamiyan, we experienced a shortage of electricity after the midnight, and they used mainly people using solar panels. So this is the sign of poverty, that government is not completely able to provide them with electricity. So after midnight, there was a cut of electricity, but before and until after 7 a.m. internet returned, and there were no limitations. If you go to Iran, there is a strict limitations, so you cannot use social media. So you cannot use freely Facebook or Instagram. But here in Afghanistan, Taliban hasn't made steps to limit your access to social media as well. Of course, it's not advisable, to be honest, to promote your whereabouts. I was told. Still, you have to be cautious. I don't want to make it more pinky, the situation, that it's advisable to, not to share your places, but otherwise you can walk freely in the streets, you can shop, you can buy things, and you can visit restaurants. So in Kabul, I went to the Chicken Street, a major place once very popular among hippies, to buy some antique jewelry or lapis lazuli stones. Nobody stopped me, and of course they provided me with certificates, but there was, when leaving the country, there was not a big issue. So nobody asked about what did you buy, what did you see. So there was a card which was prepared by the Taliban authorities when I entered the country, and I had to preserve this card until my departure. But that was all. So I would say, this is because of the fact that this is still, these are the very first steps of tourism. We don't know, we cannot predict what will happen in the next years, but it depends on the political situation, the economic growth, and the international recognition of the country. But yet, the Taliban showed signs of pragmatism, and there are operating local fixers and agencies with good local guides, I would say. So my guide was a quite knowledgeable one, a very intelligent man with a fluent English knowledge, and his team actually were all English speakers, almost everybody. This was something like a family-run travel agency. So it was something like a clan-like travel agency, but it worked. And they were quite happy to help us, and they were very friendly and hospitable. So there, I didn't experience any negative comment, any signs of hospitality during my trip. Afghans are very warm-hearted people. Ordinary Afghan people greeted us, asked us. Of course, my situation was quite unique because I speak Dari, so one of the official languages of Afghanistan, and I could communicate with locals with their own languages. But even these inner glimpses showed me that there's a willingness to accept tourism, both on behalf of the authorities and on behalf of local people, of course, with some limitations.
How do you recognize a good travel agency or a good fixer?
Actually, I didn't organize myself this trip. I was kindly asked to join this trip in September, working as a lecturer. So my position was a lecturer position. So I had to talk as a professor of Middle Eastern studies about Islamic culture of Afghanistan, Buddhism, or archaeology, etc., etc. And the organizer had a local company, and he made contacts to this fixer or this local agency through Pakistan. I think Pakistan is very strongly represented in Afghanistan. We know that Pakistan exerts a very strong influence on Afghanistan. It always exerted a very strong influence on Afghanistan. And I don't know too much about this context, but I know that they operate, this Western agency, through this agent of Pakistan who has their own company or own contacts in Afghanistan. And this is an officially registered travel agency we had in Afghanistan, offering good services for us.
You have mentioned that it's not unusual to encounter solo travelers in Afghanistan. Do you have any tips and advice for people who would like to travel to Afghanistan by themselves?
Well, I think it's better to prepare. But it's better to check the websites where you can see the news of others. I don't have special advices for them because this is a special community. These single travelers or individual travelers, the vloggers, they building their own communities. They exchange information among themselves. So I, as a lecturer, joining mainly tour groups, I'm not in a position to give advices for those who travel alone. This is a different experience. But I would say that my impression is that don't underestimate the local problems, but don't overemphasize the local problems. But you should be realistic. And there's websites and there's individual, travelogues or social media sites who can be quite informative about Afghanistan and the local situation. And this, of course, there's no official political support to go to Afghanistan. Let's be honest. So you hardly will find any official governmental source supporting you to go Afghanistan. That's why you should be cautious. You have to be prepared. You have to be prepared, and you have to be realistic. And you have to be patient. This is not a Western country. So if there is some delay in your flight, so instead of 6 o'clock p.m., you have to have a flight at 9 p.m., you have to be patient. This is the situation. But anyway, you can fly. You can have a flight and you can go from Kabul to Herat, from Herat to Kabul. These things are working. And actually, there are strict security measures, especially at the hotels. Sometimes we had to wait for long minutes. Each of our bags were checked one by one. So these regulations still exist, and we know why. So this is my impression, that don't be too westernized, but don't be too easternized as well. Actually, you have to follow the local regulations. It's very good to have a good local English knowledge. If you don't speak Pashtun or Dari, the English is very important. Many people are still well trained, and there are language schools still offering classes. So young people still, of course, this is a problem. But the Taliban, I think, soon will start realizing that education is important for them. So they need their own administration to run the country. So my advice is just to be realistic, be cautious, but it's not a future things. It's not a thing which is actually, it's not a thing which we cannot organize. Afghanistan can be a good destination. Of course, it won't be a major destination, a popular destination, but my idea that you should have reliable sources, such as Hayrion. So the Hayrion company, for example, here in Central Europe, can offer information about travel to Afghanistan. This is very important, that you should have reliable sources when preparing for this trip.
My last question for today is, what tips and advice do you have for travel agencies who are considering organizing tours in Afghanistan?
Travel agencies won't organize too much to Afghanistan. Although I heard about a Hungarian company which is not considering something to Afghanistan, my advice is that you should have skilled and well-prepared tour leaders. In this country, it is especially important if you have the responsibility to lead a group, 5 people, 10 people. It's better to organize first small groups. Don't organize a 25 persons group, because it's pretty impossible. It's very difficult, I think. The number of guest houses, the number of hotels are still limited in this country. It's better to have a small group. But the most important issue, that you should have a reliable and experienced and knowledgeable local leader, and a reliable and experienced and knowledgeable native leader, who leads the group from Hungary or from Slovakia or from other countries. This is very important. Don't use those guys who never ever have any knowledge about Afghanistan. This is very important. Of course, it's pretty difficult to find somebody who already traveled to that country, but try to find these guys. And of course, if you don't find, try to prepare as much as you can. This is very important. Don't use those people who are internationally widely traveling everywhere. This is not the country where your Caribbean or Cuban or Italian experiences can work. Local knowledge, or at least you should find people who were already in the region, in Pakistan or Iran or in Central Asia. This very much helps to understand the local customs and manners in Afghanistan, especially in Islamic culture.
Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you today, and I can't wait to make more podcasts on interesting destinations like Afghanistan.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Hayrion podcast. We are looking forward to sharing with you more exciting news on the politics and business of the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. For further information, please follow us at hayrion.com, as well as on X and LinkedIn.